today's surveillance is in many ways, very different to the surveillance that took place, during the existence of the German Democratic Republic. And one of the big differences between those two types of surveillance is that in the GDR, the type of surveillance that people experienced was quite rigid. So that means there were real life people watching others. There were real life people following others. There were real life people, even sometimes handwritten, writing up reports on people. And quite often it was, people that you knew. So your friends, your family, and as you can see from the vast number of files that are still in the Stasi archives, so files that were written by unofficial informants, it's really mind-boggling to the sheer extent to how much the actual population watched one another. And so in that sense, it's quite different from contemporary surveillance, which is largely digital. So if you think about, your social media accounts, Instagram, Facebook, Google, that sort of thing, the amount of information that's gathered on your smartphones, that's gathered through credit cards, like any kind of digital trace of what you're doing that you leave in the everyday world is a huge amount of data that can't even be compared to what the Stasi did. Of course, their type of surveillance is much more personal, and the threat was much more personal. Whereas nowadays, the threat is actually, if you think about it, probably a bigger threat because as the secret services all around the world can probably access, messaging services, things on your phone quite easily, and these things can reveal so much more about you than maybe what the Stasi could find out back then, and so that is really the interesting. The interesting dynamic, but what it teaches us is that when people give you the argument that, it doesn't really matter, I don't really have anything to hide, I can put out all that information, and the same, that people who say, during the GDR times, if you had nothing to hide, there was no problem. The thing is, though, those things can change. So what is considered to be right can change quite quickly within history, and especially nowadays, as there's a record of everything, things that you might say now might be, considered bad in 10 years down the line. If there's a record of something that always, poses a threat to your freedom, and that's really what the two have in common. That's what we can learn from that. So in the GDR, even if you didn't necessarily do something wrong, you could still become the target of the secret police, and the same is the case now. If you look at, for example, racial or religious profiling, people might be targeted without having done anything wrong. So we have to be very mindful of the type of information we put out there, and the value of privacy.